Liam Kaine, who's 23, stood shaking in court this week as his sentence was read aloud, and that imagery gives me just a little bit of joy. He was convicted of 9 counts of sexual activity with a child, attempted rape of a child under the age of 13, indecent photographs of children, and a lot more. He was finding his victims by using Xbox. He would get, these young boys. He would try to gain their trust by offering them money and FIFA points. And he's going to spend the next 10 years of his life in prison, where hopefully he's going to find out what it's like to be a victim of sexual abuse. He was caught due to the fact that one of the mothers actually found out that her son was being abused. She went to the authorities. This guy then tried to hack the victim's Facebook page so he could send a message to himself to act like it was from the victim, but he was caught because he kept on misspelling a word. And so later he admitted to having indecent pictures, but he still claimed innocence on everything else. So he made his victims go through another trial, another horror, by making them relive everything, where he eventually was found guilty by a jury. But for starters, I think 10 years is way too light for a guy who appears to have ruined at least 10 young lives. I mean, is a life only worth 1 year now? People like this need to be castrated and locked away for good, because I don't think you can be cured when you're this fucked in the head. And what's so terrifying is that these people are everywhere. And most of the time, you have no idea who it could actually be. I mean, we just recently had the Subway guy over here in the States, Jared, who gave up a life of luxury. I mean, he had it all. He had a family, he had kids, he had wealth, and he gave it all up for a different type of footlong because he's going to be rotting in prison now due to his sick obsession with kids. I just can't imagine how warped your head has to be to prey on innocent people like this. Whether it's children, children more so, but even adults. Bad is bad, wrong is wrong. I just read where a bunch of rapes happened in Germany, where several refugees over New Year's basically gang raped several women over there, which is equally sick and disgusting. When I was younger, I think I mentioned this once before, that I grew up in a pretty religious environment. And one of the things that I hated was that my family would always go to different churches. Every time something happened that they didn't agree with or whatever, they would just pack up and we would go to a new church. So it was kind of hard for me. I won't speak for my brother, but I would say it's hard for both of us to make friends and kind of get settled in, because you had no idea when we were going to leave and maybe never come back. So who's my friend today, I may not ever see again. When I was around 15 or so, we started going to this church that was out of town. And long story short, my family became friends with a lot of people, but in particular this one couple. And they were an older couple. I'm not going to say the guy's name, but he was in his mid-60s, I believe, at the time. He might have been in his late 50s, but he was definitely somewhere within that age range. If you had to imagine a picture-perfect set of grandparents, on the outside, this would be them. He had kids that were grown up. They had done well for themselves. He had a newborn baby granddaughter they were always bragging about. Nothing seemed strange about this family from the outside looking in. Now, they did have a lot of money. They had a lot of money. He was a specialist in dentistry, and sometimes you hear that dentists are a little different types of characters, but I'm not going to lump them all together. But he was a dentist. And he wasn't just a normal dentist, he was a specialist, so he dealt with high-end stuff. So they had a lot of income. And so they would invite us over to their house almost every Sunday, because we didn't drive home because it was out of town. So, we would go to services in the morning, then we would go do something during the day, and then come back and have church again at night. And so this couple, they had a 3-story house. It was huge. In-ground swimming pool, home theater, a gaming rig. It was an awesome setup, especially for a kid who's 15 or 16 years old. They're going through that rebellious period. And I pretty much grew up relatively close to being poor, I would say. So I loved hanging out at this couple's house. And he was connected with all sorts of people. I mean, well-off people. I'm talking IndyCar racers, country singers. He lived the life. And although he was an older guy, he didn't act his age at all. Like, he acted just like a big kid. So he was somebody, like, at that age group that you felt could be a friend, even though he really wasn't in your age range. Like, it seems kind of strange, I guess, now looking back at it. But at the time, I mean, he just seemed like a cool dude. He played sports. We'd go out and play racquetball together. And so most of the time, he just let me hang out at his house and do whatever I pleased. Like, him and his wife would go grocery shopping, and I'd just, sit there and play on the home theater or go swimming or play, the PC, whatever. And I would take dates over to his house because, like, I thought this was cool to show off. Like, I know somebody who's got all this wealth and everything. And so I would take girls over. We would watch movies. I would take them swimming or whatever. He let me borrow his Jaguar one time to take a girl to the prom. So, I mean, for me, this guy was a friend. And again, at the time, it seemed like an awesome setup. His wife was nice and sweet and all. I mean, they seemed legit and normal. But as I got older, started doing my own things, got my own car, got my own house, started being more rebellious, not feeling like I had to do everything that, my parents wanted me to do. So, like, I stopped going to church, stopped going to that church at least. I stopped having contact with this guy as much because I was growing up. I was living my own life now. One night, several years later, I was probably 19 or 20 at this time. And I remember it just like it was yesterday, though, because my mom called me up and she was bawling her eyes out. And she was asking me if I was at home because she needed to see me. And I'm freaking out because she won't tell me over the phone what's happening. So I'm thinking the worst, I'm like, somebody's been in an accident, somebody's died. And so she got to the house and her and my dad walked in and they sat down. And they told me that this guy that we had known for years was just arrested. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, that's what you were freaking out about? So I was relieved because, I mean, whatever. It wasn't me going to jail, and it wasn't one of my family members, and everybody's, safe and healthy. And then she told me that it was because he was arrested for sodomy with a child abuse. And at first, whenever this was all starting coming out of the news, like, he was proclaiming his innocence. He was saying that this is just an extortion attempt because, he had a lot of wealth. And then another boy came forward, and I think there were 3 boys. I know there were at least 2. And one of them I actually knew. I wasn't like best friends with him, but I've known him since I was a kid growing up. So at this point, I was pretty confident that this was all true. And I remember my mom barely being able to get the words out. And the reason she was so upset was she wanted to ask me if I had ever been abused. Had this guy ever tried anything with me? And so at that point, I understood why she was so freaked out. Because think of yourself as a parent. It could have been that you've placed your kid in the care of what's now known as a pedophile. This guy's a pedophile. And so, thankfully, I don't know if it was because I was a little bit older. I don't know if it was because I was always talking about girls or bringing girls over or what. I don't think this guy was a rapist in the sense that he would have forced himself on anybody. But he was certainly charismatic. And he would have definitely manipulated you into doing something and taking full advantage of it, I'm sure of. So for whatever reason, nothing ever happened to me, thank God. But as I got back to kind of thinking on things, like after this all set in and I started really thinking about it, I realized that there were a couple of times where things weren't right. Like the red flags didn't go up all at once during the moment, but now that, hindsight is kind of 20/20, now that going back and looking at things, I realized that there were some things that were just odd and out of place. Like one time I remember that I had my swimming trunks and I was getting ready to change, and I was waiting on his wife to come out of the bathroom. so I could go swap my clothes, And he told me, he's like, you can just change here. And I remember laughing it off and saying, no, I'm just going to wait on her. And, that should have been the end of it, because this guy was always joking around, so it's hard to know when he's being serious or when he's joking, and he kind of, kept on at it. He's like, whatever, just go ahead and change. What's the big deal? We're not going to see anything we haven't seen before, right? And so he kept on saying these things like, you don't know how long she's going to be in there or what. And I was starting to feel a little bit pressured. And I'm like, no, because I'm the type of guy who, I never did even shower or undress in the locker room at school. Thankfully, my gym period was at the end of the day, so I didn't have to go through the rest of the day stinking most of the time. But I get super uncomfortable if I'm sitting there taking a piss at a urinal in a public bathroom and somebody walks in and tries to start talking to me. Like, I think that's the weirdest shit in the world. Like, I'm holding my dick, you're a stranger, why are you trying to talk to me? And I always give them the, what the fuck is wrong with you look, Now, I don't even like to talk to strangers, period. So I definitely don't want to meet and talk to you in the bathroom. I'm comfortable with my dragon, but as far as I'm concerned, that's for the ladies, And I never did change in front of him, thankfully. I went to another room to do it. But, again, it was just like, he would say things in a jokingly manner, so he didn't really take it that serious, and so it didn't throw up all these red flags that it should have, knowing that now what I know. But I also talked to my best friend, because he went down there with me a few times, because we would play racquetball together, and he told me he had almost the same exact encounter. And at the same time, he said the same thing, where it didn't, jump out to him. It's like this guy's just wanting to see me naked, but it did seem weird to him at the time. And, this guy I never would have imagined was a pedophile or gay. He always had attractive women working in his office. He was always talking to me about, the girls I was seeing. He introduced me one time, I think, to Miss Teen Alabama, or she might have not been Miss Teen, but she was definitely in the runnings. Like, she was like one of the finalists or something. She was gorgeous, but whatever. Like, I never got that impression at all from him. And I think that's what was so fucking terrifying. And it did mess with my head a bit. And, even though I hadn't seen him in forever, years after that, knowing who he was, there were times where I actually had a few nightmares about the guy, even though I wasn't even abused. And I think knowing that I was so close to somebody so dangerous, and I think it really got to me because I feel like I'm a pretty good judge of people. Like, I feel like I'm a pretty good person reader. How you can look at somebody and you just get a feeling about them. Like, I feel like I'm pretty good at that. And so it freaked me out when I realized that this guy had went totally under the radar and I didn't see it. And who would have thought watching Cosby growing up, thinking that he was on the sidelines drugging and raping women? Who would have thought watching the Subway commercials that you're watching a guy who gets a hard-on over little kids? It's disgusting. And these people who are actually molested and abused, if it affected me without me actually being abused, I can't imagine what it does to somebody's head who actually goes through that. Whether you're a kid, especially a kid, but even as an adult, that has to be hell on earth. These people are downright evil. And if there is a hell, there's a special place in hell, I think, reserved for these types of people. These people are manipulative. And these kids and their victims, they don't get a second chance at growing up normal. That's been taken away from them. So that's why I feel like these predators should be put down for the animals that they are. Maybe not killed, although I wouldn't object to some of them being killed, but certainly locked away and watched for a very long period of time. And I don't think 10 years is near enough for this piece of shit. But it does give me a little bit of satisfaction knowing that he was shaking as his sentence was read, and knowing the hell that hopefully he's going to go through every night in prison. Thoughts go out to the victims. You want to read more about it? Links down in the description box.